What's up, and welcome to the Level Health Podcast. We've got Dr. John Mike on the show today. Dr. Mike has a PhD in exercise and sports science, and he's a sports performance coach, professor, and author. Big thanks to Dr. Mike for coming on our show. You can check out his Instagram at Dr. J Mike or his website, drjmike.com. We'll have both of those linked in the description below. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy the episode.
Anyways, Dr. Jonathan Mike. Is it Dr. Mike, Dr. John? How do you like it?
Yeah, however you want to say it, Dr. John, Dr. Mike's good with me.
Gotcha. I like Dr. Mike. So today we're going to be discussing basically how fitness professionals can better bridge the gap between research and practical application, both emerging research and established research. But if you don't mind, can you get us started by just kind of explaining why we're looking to you for this and how can you help us just figure this out?
Yeah, so my background obviously is I have an undergrad and master's in exercise and sports science. My PhD is actually in the same. I got my doctorate at University of New Mexico in Albuquerque in 2015. I started teaching classes actually before I finished, and I started in 2014, and I was a full-time professor for about 7 years. I've stopped teaching, full-time. I still teach a couple of lab classes a semester, but I've migrated more towards obviously heavy duty on the speaking. I've been published in every major fitness and consumer, strength and bodybuilding magazine in the country, or written for, interviewed, or contributed in some form or fashion. I used to be a top writer for Elite FTS. I've written 10 book chapters on sport nutrition and strength and conditioning. I'm currently writing a book now for Human Kinetics on strongman training for strength and performance. So that should be kind of wrapped up, soon. And then we'll get into some of the photo shoot stuff, later this year. And then I've worked, taught undergraduate and graduate courses and XFIZ, advanced strength and conditioning, sport nutrition, undergrad and graduate. And then I've taught at, I think I'm right at 60 or just past 60 events and conferences I've spoken at in just under 10 years. It'll actually be 10 years this June. So I passed the 60 mark, which is one of my goals. I wanted to get to 50 in under 10 years, and I managed to blow past that. So put a lot of content out on social media. There's a lot of people that follow me, and then have some partnerships with some other companies, and just doing more fitness, entrepreneur stuff, now, which is where things are really big and things are really taking off. So yeah, I love what I do, and I love educating and bringing value to individuals and moving the needle in directions that need to be moved in. So thanks for having me on.
Of course. What medium is your favorite? Which do you kind of gravitate to, or do you just find that they're different tools?
Talking about social, you mean?
Oh gosh,
Okay.
man. Yeah, social media. No, just medium, writing. I mean, you speaking events. What do you find the most?
I think my fave would be the speaking, because it's one, it's live, two, it's in person. I mean, I've done a lot of virtuals, obviously the last, few years. But I love doing live because it's more, it can be more of an intimate, type of setting. I mean, you can do demonstrations, you can ask real life questions. So I like that the most. The writing stuff, I do like. There's a really big difference between academic writing and the creative magazine type writing. And if you're so used to doing one or the other, then you're only going to really get good at one. I mean, I was fortunate enough to have some advisors during my doctorate tenure that I was wanted. They asked me to start writing for some of these other magazines, and wasn't until I was before and after my doctorate that got picked up. Like, so for example, I was one of the top writers for Elite FTS for 4 years. And so I wrote a column called The Research Meathead. And it didn't really take a long time for it to really start gaining popularity. And one of the individuals that worked there at the time, sent me an email. It's like, hey, love your stuff. Would you be interested in writing for some of these other, big time magazines? And I said, sure. So I ended up being one of the big feature writers for Muscle Mag for a couple of years, and then did all this other stuff and like Teen Nation bodybuilding stuff. So it's a different type of skill set. It's a different writing. It's more conversational writing versus like academic skill writing. So, the academic stuff is a little bit more flowery, a little bit more academic jargon, whereas the magazines is more like, conversationalist, as if it were you're talking to somebody in person or live, speaking. So it's a different type of skill. And I would say, like, having done both and do both, it takes a special skill set to kind of go back and forth. And there's just a lot of repetition over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they have to be additive. That kind of different cross medium, really just communication, I guess, is really what it is. Different forms of communication. But you did some time as a professor, been in the academic space, and you're talking about how dry. I look at it as quite dry, like the academic writing. And then there's also the element of like we're adding words to make it longer, seem a little bit more. Gosh, just being able to phrase it well. But that background as a professor, I think that you're kind of living in the basic level of competence. How can I get this person to be functional in this field and move on and continue learning? So, what is the basic level that you see of a competence for a fitness professional, somebody working as a personal trainer or fitness professional and elsewhere, to be able to absorb it and then utilize scientific research?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I wish more people would ask that question. I think over the last number of years, say 3 years, 4 years, maybe last half decade or so, we've gotten better in terms of trainers and fitness professionals about reading research and trying to disseminate it. I mean, there's still a struggling issue. I mean, there's people in undergraduate and graduate programs that don't really know how to disseminate, research, and there's courses for that. I mean, I think overall, academia has done better in terms of a specific curriculum about actually integrating the research into the curriculum. And what I mean is, I don't mean just about talking about studies or referencing them. I'm talking about, hey, here's article A. What is the breakdown of research? How can you actually apply it? How do you apply methodologies, and what does it mean to read methodologies, and what are all the processes that actually really go into that? So I think on the whole we've done better with that. But let's just be real here. The vast majority of trainers and coaches don't read research. One, because either they don't know how, or they haven't learned the skill set, or haven't taken the time, or they maybe just not have the time because they're busy, obviously training, programming and spending time with clients, and athletes, or getting ready for the season and all that. But at the same time, there are a vast majority and a lot of coaches and trainers that do, research, and do read that on a regular basis. So, respect to them. And anybody that does that obviously has my respect. And you don't have to, be able to disseminate and nitpick every little single detail, but for example, like, okay, what's the intro? What are the methodologies? What type of subjects did they actually use? Were trained? Were they untrained? What were the results? Most people just read the abstract, or the very last sentence of the abstract, or just the discussion, or the very last paragraph of the discussion, like, oh, this is all that I need to know. When they really need to take a little bit more extra time to kind of dissect and figure out, okay, these researchers did, X. They examined and tried to explore, X. Here's what they did, methodologies, and here are the outcomes. So basically, when everybody asks this question, I try to break it down in those key simple steps. What's the title? I mean, do people even really care? To begin with, does it spark any interest? What variables were they measuring? Was it reliable? Were they valid? Measurements. If they do any type of extensive, blood work, for example, if they're doing resistance training research, what types of exercises or movements are they doing? How many sets? How many reps? Again, the vast majority, my issue with a lot of training studies is that the vast majority of them, even to this day, are done with untrained subjects. I mean, you can take untrained subjects and, do some body weight squats and some push-ups, and they're going to get some results, either way. So it's better to do with more trained subjects, because the generalizability, or the external validity, or the large application to coaches and trainers and to programming is larger in a sense, depending on what the effect size is. So, I think it's always a good idea that people just read, a research, and again, it takes a different type of skill. I think if you don't really, if you maybe lack some of the skill set to dissect the actual original research, review articles and meta-analysis is actually a really good place to start, because it really just combines all the current research, into one, and explains it and lays it out very nicely for most people to have better readability.
Yeah, of course. And I think that being able to, I don't even say read it, because like I consider myself to be pretty competent with reading scientific research. I think it's probably because I had like 90% of a biology degree, and a good port. Most of that was in plant biology and things like that. So it was not looking at small groups of like seven, like you said, untrained lifters that they had do, some short 8-week program and they saw results. And it's like, okay, how do I actually translate that? So it was more cut and dry. It was more higher replication, things like that. But I kind of look at it really just like a bullshit filter, because oftentimes, as I know that the industry, or probably more accurately, the media around the fitness and nutrition industry, is going to throw out things and make claims, and being able to look at that and kind of, okay, what is actual literature in this research, or the study actually says. So if we could gonna go into like just some practical application in terms of like, is somebody that is, of course, because there's research reviews that are doing the legwork for us and things like that. But if you really wanted to roll up your sleeves and kind of attack a study, where would you head as a kind of a novice or a beginner on this, or where could you head?
I guess assuming like specific journals, if you will, or
Oh yeah, journals or specific sections within an actual report.
yeah, I think if you're looking at an original research, let's just take some of the NSCA journals, like Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, for example. I mean, obviously they come out with regular research all the time in publications. The first thing is read the title. Does it spark any type of interest? You can always read the abstract, and there's ways to download the full text, whether it's PubMed, whether it's readq.com, or like a ResearchGate is also very popular. But I mean, I think a lot of people make the mistake of just reading the abstract and then filtering out that is the total study
Hmm.
of what was done. And it's really not. I mean, you really don't know anything about the abstract unless you read it, because it's so condensed into just like one paragraph. And so I think that's a good place to start. I mean, abstract. So read the
Yeah.
abstract, read the discussion section, because you will actually learn a lot in the discussion section that will help you to understand how the abstract was actually formed. And then it would also help you understand the breakdown of the actual methodologies. So the abstract is a good place to start. And then you can start with the actual, discussion, because in the discussion section, yes, there's some numbers and obviously there's some references, but they talk about the actual results and they break it down into sections. So if you can understand the discussion section, you don't always have to go back to the research component of it, or the research, or excuse me, the results section, and then try to dissect and break down all the different graphs and all that other stuff. So the abstract is a good place to start, and then read the discussion. It will give you a really good detail synopsis of the results, various groups, and very limitations to the study, the practical applications to the study, and then it's your decision as a coach and a trainer to decide, okay, is this applicable to me? Is it applicable to clients? Is it applicable to a wide variety of demographics or athletes? That's your decision as a coach and trainer. Or if you're just wanting to read it to gain a little bit better knowledge and see what some of the current state of the science is like, and that with that particular topic, that's also your decision. So you kind of have to take some of those things with a grain of salt.
And I think it's no secret or no coincidence that those sections that you mentioned, abstract discussion methods, are also, it's always been my impression they're in a little bit different of a language than some of the results and things like in the procedure and the well, no, methods. Yeah, it's usually so. Is that where the researchers are trying to basically explain their thoughts behind it, and that's why they're doing it that way.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
typically the methodology is tells you how the procedures of the study, what measures that they use to go about trying to gain whatever result that they're trying to find. I mean, ultimately, when people use the phrase "science proves," no, that's all horseshit. Science doesn't really prove anything. This is an important point. Science doesn't really prove anything. It supports or does not support a hypothesis. Okay. So null hypothesis. Does it, whatever your question is, does your methods and your procedures try and match up, with that? So does it support your hypothesis or does it not support your hypothesis? And you're choosing methodologies And a lot of methodologies are based, and this is what most people don't really know. A lot of researchers know this, but a lot of lay public does not, and even trainers and coaches. A lot of the methodologies used in, say, you're reading the article A. A lot of the methodologies in article A are similar or stem from previous studies using a similar methodology, right? And a lot of times it's brand new, novelty methodology, but they typically are assorted by previous studies using the same or similar methodology, but maybe the subjects are older, different age, or their resistance training parameters are a little bit different to try and assess whatever outcome based on your hypothesis, right? So when people say, science proves, this or that, it doesn't prove anything. It just supports or does not support a hypothesis, and it's always changing. Like it's evolutionary. That's one of the interesting things about sports nutrition is that it not only changes, but it changes very quickly. I mean, you could have a review article or meta-analysis come out in January, and by June or September, there'll be something else with a newer study that completely, conflicts with that, or that has different, a different argument, for the same type of topic, for example. So the sport nutrition aspect changes more rapidly than the strength and conditioning stuff. I mean, for example, like periodization methodology and plyometric, mechanisms, they don't change like from one study to the other. It doesn't change from one book to the other. It doesn't change from, an XFIS text to like an advanced XFIS stuff. That stuff doesn't really change. So there's certain things in physiology and training that just never really change. It's just what methodology or training parameters are using differently to try and create something that has a lot of practical application, and a lot of coaches and trainers have utilized it for many years, but it lacks a lot of actual scientific backing in a sense. So like a basic example would be conjugate training system, for example. The utilization of like bands and chains. I mean, it was been implemented for years, from Westside Barbell and Louis Simmons, but it really wasn't until the last 5 to 10 years that there's been more publications on that specific topic. So that's something that is, again, is always changing. And it's just the job of the trainers and coaches to continue to utilize and read about those methodologies to see how they can best apply it for themselves and the people that they work with.
I think a big part of the friction in this kind of area within the fitness space is that lag between practical application and the research kind of touting what's actually been proven by the people at the forefront, often kind of sacrificing their own health and well-being potentially by tasting out new pharmaceuticals or new training methods or things like that. But I mean, oftentimes it is the people at the tip of the spear that we are looking at. We're like, what the hell are those people doing? And then a few years later, when the money gets there, research says the same thing. But you touched on what science does not do it. And I think that kind of leads to a great question. So you mentioned it does not prove or disprove anything. It's just, it's supporting the question that was researched. But what are some other red flags that often you would see this potentially in the abstract, or somebody an article saying very hard line that we found this or this proves this? What are some other red flags along those lines that are just showing that they're not really using the scientific method? Because like you said, it's not proving anything. It's just raising more questions. We're just unburying more of the right answer.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be limitations in research. I mean, that's a given. I mean, you can have the best methodologies, you can have the most highly trained individuals, you can have the perfect procedures, but there's always going to be limitations. And those limitations could stem from the actual methods itself, or it could actually stem, lack of subjects or lack of subject pool, for example. One of the red flags that people need to watch out for is within the methodology section is subject count, right? When you're doing training studies, one of the red flags that I've always utilized, and I encourage people to utilize, the same approach, is do they have trained subjects or untrained subjects? If they're untrained subjects, then they may find the result that it actually worked in terms of whatever study or effect or variable that they're looking at. Did the training actually really work, or the procedures or methodologies really work, or was it because they were untrained and they just did whatever according to the protocol and they got results? So those are some dissemination factors and red flags to look at if if subjects are trained or untrained. And typically other red flags are the resistance training protocol, and this is what drives me nuts, is, and this is still very, very common. The utilization of resistance training exercise choices and selections that is, everything is like 3 sets of 10, 3 sets of 12, leg extensions, leg presses, lat pull downs, and that's all fine. And I understand why people choose those things because it's less technically demanding. I mean, it's exercises that most people do or even know how to do, and there's always going to be some type of familiarization session, especially for individuals that may not know how to do certain things. And I think it's important, like in my research, for example, we did a short familiarization period, so you'll often see that as well. And if you do not see a familiarization protocol in those methods, it means that the subjects are getting results because they've done it, okay, and they're familiar with it. So for example, if you do a familiarization session or protocol before you actually do the real data collection, it means that the subjects will not get an effect or increase in strength or hypertrophy or whatever, because they've already familiarized themselves, they've already adapted to the process prior to doing the data collection. A lot of subjects will not do a familiarization session, and so you don't really know if they're adapting or getting their effect from the protocol or not, right? So that's another kind of red flag you have to look out for. Some other short red flags is the duration of the actual study, which is something that I'm not really sure if we can ever gain a lot of momentum on this. And what I mean is the vast majority of training studies, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 is pretty high. A year is just phenomenal. You've often seen some prior research with the effects of overtraining, over a course of 6 months to a year. However, those individuals and those subjects are being monitored by a team of people on a regular basis, and the environment and their environment is very much controlled. You won't really see a lot of overreaching, overtraining, research that's 6 months to a year with general population people, and they go to class, they don't go to sleep till 2 a.m. They wake up at 8 a.m. They eat donuts and a bunch of bullshit for breakfast. They don't even get a couple of thousand calories. You're not going to see that because the environment's too the environment's not very controlled. So with those longer end studies, even on the medical side, those individuals, especially with nutritional ward studies, the environment is extremely controlled. So you have less variability with lifestyle and stress factors and all these other types of components. So you're able to see a more tightly knit result from that. But yeah, the vast majority of training studies, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks. There's been some that have been 6 months, close to a year. But the vast majority of them are certainly well under 12 weeks.
I always think it's funny when I hear somebody talking about a nutritional ward study, and it's almost like Christmas has happened because they're like, okay, this is some solid data that we can act on and we can potentially utilize. But I mean, it's a kind of a tough pill to swallow for us, but it doesn't, there's always going to be limitations. And it seems like the number one for fitness studies specifically is the sample size and duration, of course. Are there in many training studies that are up to 6 months to a year? I know you kind of mentioned it, but with training specifically?
Yeah, there have been, but they're hard to come by. And one of the reasons for that is kind of what I alluded to is, you get up in the 3, 4, 5, 6 month mark. I mean, you're asking subjects to, be consistent and stay with your particular study for a longer period of time. And so the longer the duration of the study typically involves, more grant funding, and research funding to pay these subjects, a fairly good amount of money as an incentive to continue on with your specific study that you're asking them to do, which obviously, within the confines of, the medical aspect, when you're looking like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, all that stuff, I'm talking about big money, big pharma money, big medical money. The funding is well into the millions of dollars, particularly when it comes to, drug approval stuff, getting, FDA approval, or waiting for it, or waiting for clinical trials. Even in the university setting, um, even with with supplements, for example, oftentimes there's what's called like washout periods. You want to look at supplement A, but supplement A has maybe a 6 to 7, 8 week washout period before you can induce, or introduce supplement B, and then you have to look at those two effects, because you can't have interactions effects across supplements, because you don't really know which one
Mhm.
is actually having the most effect. So the long-term studies in terms of some of the nutrition stuff and training stuff, you have to have funding to support that. It doesn't have to be within the millions. I'm talking about on the medical side, or big pharma, all that stuff. But let's just say, for example, you get like a $30,000 grant to study some type of nutritional supplement, or even training, for example. Well, a third to about half of that cost goes to the university, so you're not really left with a whole lot, and so the rest that's left actually goes to help pay the subjects to stay with you for that data collection. But you also have to buy supplies, right? So it's like, oh gosh, I got a 30 or 50,000, $100,000 grant. Like, that's awesome. Well, by the time you even start the study, half, a third to half the money is already gone, because that's what the university takes. So it's a long, arduous process. And that's one of the reasons why, like sports performance, for example, versus sport nutrition and the medical side, um, there's not as much funding with sports performance in terms of the amount of funding that you get, versus on the nutritional side, or versus on the medical side. There's a lot of circumstances, and I've been in these situations too, where equipment companies, for example, are very popular. They have large social medias, and they're looking for people to try out their product. I've partnered with a few companies in the past that they send you the product, and you say, hey, I'm doing a study on the effects of, ABC. We'll love to be able to try your product. Let's see how we can, partner together and work out something, that can be a win-win for the both of us. That does happen, and that is common. But you're not going to be getting like, $50,000 grant for it, right? So oftentimes you have to create more of a business entrepreneur mindset with that type of role. But you still have to write up, the approval for the university. The study still has to get approved. All that stuff still has to happen. For example, like a master's student, first year. And I've even told students this. I mean, one of the key differences between like a master's and a PhD is that you already know when you're going to be done with your master's before you even start, versus like a PhD. Like, you can start, but you don't really have like a true end date, versus like a master's. That's just one of many differences. But for example, if you're a master's student and you're wanting to do a thesis, you pretty much have to know what you want to do by the end of the first semester, because you have to write it up, you got to get approval, and then the data collection can take anywhere from like 4 or 5 or 6 months, depending on what you're doing. And then you have to do the write-up. Things have to get approval by your faculty, and then defend. So all that stuff could take a year and a half worth of process. So it's not easy, for sure. And I commend a lot of individuals that continue to do that.
Oh, I've been around enough people conducting and been a part of research assistant, and it's I've always been in awe, because gosh, you have to like what you're doing, I think. And I don't know, maybe you get in too deep and you can't get out. But before I move on from actual limitations, um, I wanted to hear your opinion. Is it really a limitation as long as they acknowledge their limitations within that research? Because as long as they are not making claims that are not supported because of the limitations, we're always, like I said, we're always going to have that pill to swallow. There's always going to be limits. So is because I think a lot of people will be like, oh, it's a study with 10 people, throw that out, it's not good. But it's like, okay, but did they acknowledge that is a limitation?
Yeah, I think the vast majority of training studies do acknowledge that there are limitations. And if they do not acknowledge their limitations, either they're trying to hide something, or perhaps induce some type of like data fabrication. That does happen. I can tell you firsthand that does happen. It actually happens more than you think. So it is important that individuals do acknowledge the limitations, not just verbally, right? Whether maybe they're talking about it at a conference, but actually in the writing itself,
Yeah.
they acknowledge that the limitations, because if they don't and they go present on it, somebody is going to ask, right? What are some of the limitations? So like, hey, well, you measure this, but you really didn't talk about this part, can you address this? So that just goes back to actually knowing everything about your study, you know, um, I mean, everything, methods, this, that, and really anticipating that one, there are going to be limitations, and two, what are some of the questions that people may ask about the actual study, whether they're limitations or practical applications or not. And I'm always been very weary of people using animal data to try and transfer to human application, and all that stuff. And I mean, animal data is cool and everything, but there's so many. It's not even really in the same ballpark as trying to generalize or apply to like real life humans, in the training world. So again, you need to use apples and oranges with oranges, not try to mix the two. But yeah, it's important for people to acknowledge the limitations, because here's the other thing. If you can acknowledge your limitations and you know where you may be limited, you can use that as your advantage to produce and create another study, right? That takes the limitation and then creates an advantage out of that, right? So therefore, you're continuing to close the gap.
When it comes to duration, obviously we'd love to have 6 months, year, even gosh, that'd be fantastic to have a n equals 1,000 for a couple of years there. But on the topic of duration, is on the shorter duration studies, are they looking at mechanisms versus outcome? Are they trying to find proxies for potential outcomes of hypertrophy, strength,
I think
whatever it
it's the
is?
latter. I think it's the latter. I think when you're looking at the 4 to 6 weeks, it's typically more outcome, but proxy to outcome, versus like true mechanisms, right? I mean, the mechanistic explanations. I mean, for example, obviously hypertrophy. I mean, the number one mechanistic driver for hypertrophy is mechanical tension. I mean, it's hands down mechanical tension. I mean, you could do all the volume in the world, but just because you're doing a bunch of volume does not mean that you're inducing enough mechanical tension overload to the muscle across repetitions, across sets, across training sessions. So the more mechanistic stuff is certainly more long term, right? Given adaptation, obviously. But like for example, or another example to use is the old school of, well, when you have a brand new person that's lifting, well, the first like 8, 10, 12 weeks is like neural adaptations. Well, we know now it's like it doesn't really take 8, 10, 12 weeks. You can actually see maximum neural adaptations in about 6 weeks, maybe in the 6 to 8 week realm, right? So, but again, it's adaptation. And when you're looking at the mechanistic things with that, it's just going to take a little bit longer, right? So the 4 weeks, 6 weeks is typically like acute studies, more outcome based, or utilizing that as a proxy to go further in depth to induce some type of mechanistic outcome in the future.
Okay, you cleared up quite a actually got me a little bit excited to actually get back into looking at some research. But I just finished up this month of mass, so that's my box check, the research review for the month. But okay, so kind of just moving on, we've talked about what I think oftentimes are not, I wouldn't say innocent necessarily, but not nefarious red flags within research. But I'd like to kind of shift gears to how research can used by the separate entities to manipulate, to market, whether that's media, whether that's supplement companies, often coaching, whatever it is. What are some ways that research is used to manipulate and market?
There's quite a few. I mean, I think that you see that they go hand in hand, right? I mean, if you're looking at, you watch the news, whatever news that you watch. I'm not a huge, cable news, guy, but you will see people make statements as, for example, a new study shows that, creatine supplementation increased dehydration, with high school football players, and that's why they passed out, like study shows, right? So when they make these types of bold claims without any type of supportive evidence, and if you're somebody that knows about creatine, knows the basic understanding about how it works, I mean, you don't need to be like a research professor to read about the basic benefits and how creatine actually really works, because the vast majority of internet articles will read it and do that for you. But when you make these bold claims and statements, and first of all, creatine doesn't really cause dehydration because it actually increases plasma volume, or the intracellular, hydration status, within the cell. But, when you actually think about when people make these statements, well, you go back and say, hey, this person passed out, and then we found out that they took creatine. Okay, well, because they weren't really hydrated in the first place, they're overweight. It's August. You're in the Texas heat or the South heat. You didn't really eat much breakfast. You take, it's like, they use it as correlation equals causation, and that's not the case at all. And that's very common. That drives me nuts. And a lot of people in the lay media, use correlation as causation. It's just not the case. It's really never been the case. So that's how people can manipulate emotionally and or psychologically, to present whatever outcome that they actually want. But the data is also used to manipulate stuff to market as well. You see this almost all the time on infomercials. You have paid actors and paid models that promote these silly products that are a bunch of bullshit, to manipulate people psychologically and emotionally to get them to buy their product. And the products just, they don't really work. Most of them, 99% of them don't work at all. All the lab challenges and all this stuff on TV, and you have somebody there standing in a lab coat saying, university professor. First of all, they're not a professor. Second, they're wearing a white lab coat to get you to believe that they've actually been a part of this study, when they're really just regurgitating the information that they're being told to say, right? So, and so that's how they can actually manipulate, to market. And then you can also data fabricate and manipulate numbers in your favor. We've seen that quite a bit over the last number of years, politically, and of course, economically speaking as well. So it's not just like in the fitness, equipment industry or fitness industry. Like it's all over. It's across, industries. So again, it's being educated enough to know the foundations and the basic understanding, so you can create that own filter yourself. So you can call, hey, wait a second, but this is not really how this works. Like it's really this. So it's important for people to stay educated, and have a foundation about these things, just so they don't feel like they're being manipulated emotionally, to buy a product that they're completely wasting money on.
This kind of came full circle back to the bullshit filter. You have that screening, but it also, having the education to really defend yourself, because you don't need to be an expert, but you need to know enough, because people that are going to be utilizing these studies, they typically only know enough. They only know enough to twist it into their favor. And again, if you dig 1 inch deeper, you're going to find out that they were just twisting things to try to make it fit whatever narrative they were already planning and, messing with. I mean, one of my favorites was it's pre-workout that has deer antler velvet, and they say it increases IGF by 1,000% or whatever. But it's like, okay, but that is a protein that's immediately getting broken down by the acid in the stomach. So it's like, it's not traveling into your bloodstream ready to go, making that raise. But actually, do you have something to say on that?
Yeah, there's another example. There was a researcher in the state of Florida. This was a number of years ago. I won't say the university or who it was, but they presented on some data on a very popular supplement. And they got up there at the conference and they were like, this supplement increases, testosterone, 33% more than like anabolic steroids. And everybody's just, it's just like, that's another example, right? I mean, manipulating, data, to say like some supplement increases testosterone or output more than actual true like pharmacological, drugs, which is so incredibly misleading and it's misguided. And it just goes to show that you're purposely manipulating and using language to get people to make a decision because you're trying to drive home your own personal agenda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, human ego just takes over so much of science, and it's disappointing because we want to be able to rely on science. But again, it's just having a little bit of literacy to defend yourself. So you mentioned creatine. I was happy that you mentioned creatine because that's one of my favorite things. Besides, honestly, coffee over the the last couple decades, seeing coffee be a little bit vindicated and even potentially being health promoting. Same thing with creatine. I was 15 years old. My mom took me to GNC to get a tub of creatine. She was worried it was anabolic steroid. She asked if it was okay, and of course, GNC, they have all the integrity in the world. Of course, they were honest. They said yes, but come to find out, it's actually very health promoting, it seems. So that was my one that I've been most excited about in the recent years. Is there anything that you've been excited to see in the research or in the coming research?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I give lectures and present on like sports supplements and like recovery, right? Obviously, I talk about creatine, quite a bit. One of my researcher friends and colleagues, Dr. Scott Forbes is a big creatine researcher. So one of the things about creatine is that really over the last, 10 to 15 years, the vast majority of research on creatine has actually been in the clinical setting, with immune system marker responses, cognitive function, responses, brain health, increase in creatine, obviously within the brain, but not just in the muscle, stuff with like Alzheimer's patients. So everything on the clinical side, depression. I mean, yeah, we still talk about it within the confines of like strength and power development, hypertrophy, explosive power, but the vast majority of studies on creatine over the last 10 to 15 years have been overwhelmingly clinical. So it's actually nice to see a supplement that in its foundation, obviously still very popular, to kind of migrate over to on the clinical setting, because you don't really see that a whole lot with other supplements. There's really no supplement really ever that has kind of crossed the boundaries of health and performance, strength and power, and has a wide array of health benefits on the clinical side. So it's nice to see that.
Mm-hmm. I still hesitate. Not, of course, I want to say I fully bought into creatine because like can't do that, but I've been burned so many times by supplements. Of course, that was my young naivety, thinking that I needed to have arginine, citrulline before every workout. I had to have the inno boosters, all that stuff. But it's been, I didn't really thought about that. I don't think you'd be able to tell me this. Has there been anything else that has made that transition from a sports supplement to, oh gosh, maybe this is an essential nutrient potentially?
I think there's some more supplements on the immune side that certainly has some more potential, but they don't have the popularity that creatine has, right? I mean, beta alanine, there's a lot more stuff on beta alanine, recently. But mechanistically, beta alanine and creatine really do the exact same thing, like on a physiological level, mechanistically, they do the exact same thing. The only difference is, dose differences, some timing differences in terms of you have to take it a little bit longer, but under certain, a little bit more specific exercise conditions for beta alanine versus just creatine. But I mean, there's certainly some supplements, but not to the massive magnitude that creatine has.
Okay, I'm glad we had this conversation today for many reasons, but not the least of which is the fact that I am just slowly but surely building that wall for creatine because, I'm very excited about it. But well, thank you very much, Dr. Mike, for coming on today. Is there anywhere you wanted to send people? Anything you're working on, you're excited about?
Yeah, there is. So we have a number of conferences that I'm speaking at. I will be at Raise the Bar conference at the end of February in Dallas, and then I will be speaking at the first ever Real Coaches Summit that's in Las Vegas, March 6th through 7th, and then I'm speaking at IDEA Personal Trainer East that next same week in DC. I'm in the Bay Area speaking at California Mania, maybe going to Orlando sometime in April. And I'm also working on some of my in-person, seminars as well to be held in Phoenix and likely some in Las Vegas. And then I'm also working on doing some online paid webinars and some exercise science and like sports performance lecture series. Also have to finish writing a book for Human Kinetics on strongman for strength and performance. So that definitely has to get finished first. It's been a long, arduous process, but I think everybody will really like the book, in its final stage. So also talking at Idea World, that's in July in LA. So we got some really cool stuff, coming along on the website, and also speaking stuff. So I'll be sure to share that with everybody as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I've been really impressed with Human Kinetics and Corey over there, who they've gotten on. It seems like they have a knack for getting the right people. But awesome. Thanks again, Dr. Mike, and we'll look forward to talking to you again someday.
All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.